The Cleveland Browns are orchestrating something that's caught the entire NFL community completely off guard. This isn't just another draft day shuffle or routine roster adjustment that happens every offseason. What's being discussed behind closed doors at their facility represents a fundamental shift in how they're approaching the next decade of franchise building. And honestly, most people haven't caught up to what's actually happening here yet. Think about it for a second. The Browns hold the 6th overall pick in a draft class that's genuinely loaded with elite talent at multiple positions across both sides of the ball. They could walk into that war room, execute the straightforward play, and select the best available player. Secure a cornerstone piece. Move forward like every other franchise operates. Standard procedure. But the whispers circulating through league insiders and front office sources suggest something far more calculated and strategic is unfolding behind the scenes. The rumors indicate the organization is seriously considering trading down from that premium slot, and the potential return could fundamentally reshape their entire roster construction strategy for years to come. This isn't just speculation either. Multiple sources are discussing real trade scenarios with specific partners. The potential implications are enormous. We're talking about a move that could either cement Cleveland as a legitimate championship contender or completely derail their future trajectory. Stay locked in as we break down exactly what the Browns are contemplating, who they might be trading with, and why this could be the most important draft decision the franchise makes in the next decade. On the surface, what the Cleveland Browns are apparently considering sounds absolutely insane. You have a top 6 pick in your hands, a premium asset that most franchises would kill to possess, and you're contemplating giving it away, trading it down for additional selections and future assets. To casual observers, that strategy seems counterintuitive, even reckless. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting, and where understanding elite-level draft strategy separates the competent front offices from the truly visionary ones. The core strategic debate happening right now within NFL circles revolves around a fundamental question. Should Cleveland prioritize sheer quantity of quality selections, or bet everything on landing one singular elite, generational talent at the 6th spot? This isn't a new debate in football, but the way the Browns appear to be approaching it suggests they've come to a conclusion that challenges conventional wisdom. What if stepping back in the draft order actually gives Cleveland more impact talent than staying at 6 ever could? What if the team is viewing this through a lens that most organizations haven't fully embraced? Think about the traditional draft philosophy for a moment. Conventional wisdom says you draft the best player available. You don't trade down from premium positions unless you're desperately trying to fill multiple holes. You certainly don't contemplate multiple trades in sequence. But the game is evolving. Sophisticated front offices are beginning to recognize that in a draft class where talent runs deep across multiple rounds, the mathematical advantage of acquiring more premium picks actually outweighs the certainty of selecting one elite prospect. The internal discussions within the Browns front office are generating serious momentum and conversation. Insiders connected to the organization are talking about a genuinely revolutionary approach to roster building that challenges how teams have traditionally constructed championship rosters. Imagine this scenario. Cleveland holds that 6th overall pick, then deliberately trades it away to accumulate multiple premium selections throughout the 1st round and beyond. The team could potentially land multiple high-impact contributors like Carnell Tate, Jordan Tyson, or Zachariah Branch within the 1st round alone. But that's only possible if they execute this strategy with precision. Here's the absolute heart of the tension that every analyst is grappling with right now. Should Cleveland prioritize accumulating a massive quantity of selections, or should they stick with conventional wisdom and select elite talent? Trading down from 6 means potentially forfeiting the opportunity to select a singular superstar, a player who could individually transform a franchise trajectory. But simultaneously, it means building the kind of depth that's absolutely necessary to survive and thrive during an NFL season where injuries happen constantly and unpredictably. In a league that consistently punishes teams for lacking depth, that punishes franchises that depend too heavily on singular talents, this trade-down approach suddenly transforms from looking like cowardice into appearing like strategic brilliance. Consider the alternative. Cleveland stays at 6, selects an elite prospect, but then struggles to find complementary talent in later rounds. One injury to that elite prospect, and suddenly the team is navigating a lost season. Conversely, if the Browns accumulate 5 solid starting caliber players through multiple trades down, they've distributed risk across their roster. That's championship-level thinking. The precedent for this strategy isn't unprecedented either. Teams like the New England Patriots built dynasty-level success through the draft by consistently accumulating multiple picks and finding consistent value throughout all 7 rounds. The Seahawks built their Legion of Boom roster by embracing similar principles. Cleveland appears to be studying this blueprint and adapting it for their specific situation and personnel needs. But here's something critical that separates this potential strategy from typical rebuilds. The Browns aren't operating from a position of weakness. They're not desperately grasping at quantity because they lack quality. They're contemplating this approach from a position of organizational strength. They fielded a top 5 defense last season. The offensive line has genuine depth and capability. The coaching staff has been upgraded. The quarterback situation, while complicated, isn't in total crisis mode. This is a team that's close to championship contention, and they're trying to make the final sophisticated moves that push them over the edge into legitimate Super Bowl viability. The front office has apparently arrived at a conclusion that most casual fans haven't even considered yet. Maybe the difference between winning a championship and finishing second doesn't come from one singular elite draft pick. Maybe it comes from having 5 quality contributors instead of 1 star and 4 mediocre players. Maybe it comes from building a roster where losing any single player doesn't crater your entire season. This represents a fundamental philosophical shift in how Cleveland approaches player acquisition. Rather than continuing down the path of hoping individual draft picks become franchise cornerstones, they're embracing a philosophy that builds championship depth through strategic accumulation. It's less about hitting on one massive pick and more about hitting on multiple selections at a slightly lower cost. The questions swirling around the franchise right now are genuinely fascinating from an organizational perspective. Does the front office have the confidence in their evaluation process to find impact talent throughout the draft, not just in the first round? Do they believe their scouting department can identify value in later rounds that other teams are missing? Are they prepared to make decisions that confuse casual observers but ultimately yield championships? Based on the rumors circulating, the answer to all 3 questions appears to be an emphatic yes. What makes this even more intriguing is the timing. The draft class this year genuinely does feature depth at important positions. It's not like Cleveland would be taking extraordinary risk by moving back. The talent doesn't have massive cliffs between pick 6 and pick 15. The disparity exists, certainly, but it's not catastrophic. That gap shrinks further when you're discussing picks later in the first round. This specific draft class appears almost tailor-made for executing this exact strategy. Let's actually break down what a trade-down strategy would look like in practical terms, because understanding the mechanics is crucial to understanding why this approach might work brilliantly for Cleveland. When we talk about the Browns trading down from 6, we're not discussing a single straightforward swap. We're contemplating a potentially sophisticated series of moves that could reshape their entire offensive and defensive composition. Here's the fundamental mathematics behind the strategy. If Cleveland trades the 6th overall pick to a team desperate to move up, they'd receive additional draft capital in return. That typically means receiving an early selection later in the first round, plus potentially selections in rounds 2 or 3, or possibly even future draft picks, extending into 2025 or beyond. Now, instead of having 1 pick at 6, the Browns suddenly have multiple premium selections spread throughout the first round and beyond. The appeal of this approach becomes clearer when you examine the actual talent distribution in this draft class. Reports from evaluators suggest that the difference in talent between the 6th overall prospect and the 15th overall prospect isn't nearly as significant as the number gap might suggest. There's genuine depth at receiver. There's solid offensive line talent scattered throughout the first round. The defensive side features multiple capable contributors who could make immediate NFL impact. This isn't a draft class where a few elite talents are surrounded by significant drops in ability. Now imagine this scenario. Cleveland trades from 6 down to 11, receiving a late first-round pick plus a second-rounder in return. Suddenly, they have multiple premium selections. But it doesn't stop there. They could potentially use some of those assets to trade into the middle portion of the first round. Maybe they move from 11 back to 13, acquiring additional capital. Each trade generates more picks, more opportunities, more chances to hit on impact contributors. The volume advantage becomes mathematically compelling when you actually map it out. Let's say through strategic trading, the Browns accumulate 4 selections within the first round instead of 1 premium pick at 6. Even if each of those 4 picks hits at a 70% success rate of becoming an impactful starter or rotation player, the probability of at least 2 or 3 becoming legitimate contributors is extraordinarily high. Conversely, the single pick at 6 might become an elite player, or it might become a massive bust. It's uncertain. Volume creates consistency. This approach also addresses a critical problem that plagues many NFL franchises. The draft is inherently unpredictable. Talent evaluation, while increasingly sophisticated, remains imperfect. Players bust. Prospects exceed expectations. Late-round selections become pro bowlers while top picks flame out. By distributing investment across multiple picks rather than concentrating everything into a single premium selection, Cleveland is essentially hedging against uncertainty. It's portfolio diversification applied to roster building. The defensive side of the equation becomes particularly interesting when you apply this philosophy. The Browns fielded a top 5 defense last season, but certain position groups require attention. Defensive back depth could be enhanced. Edge rusher development remains an ongoing project. Rather than hoping to find elite defensive help at a single early pick, why not accumulate multiple selections and build depth across the entire unit? A third-round safety prospect might become a legitimate starter. A fourth-round edge rusher might develop into a rotational contributor. Collectively, these acquisitions strengthen the unit without depending on any single prospect becoming an elite talent. On the offensive side, the logic is similarly compelling. The Browns require both an elite left tackle and quality receiving options. What if, through strategic trading, they could acquire talent at both positions while also improving their depth in less glamorous areas like interior offensive line or tight end depth? A traditional draft approach might result in taking an elite tackle at 6, then scrambling to find receiving help in rounds 3 and 4. The trade-down approach allows Cleveland to potentially address multiple needs while maintaining draft capital flexibility. Here's something else that makes this strategy particularly relevant to the Browns' specific situation. They actually have the luxury of flexibility. They're not in desperation mode where they need to plug immediate holes with franchise-altering impact. Their quarterback is established, though imperfect. Their defensive foundation is solid. Their coaching staff has been upgraded. This isn't a team rebuilding from complete rubble. It's a team making sophisticated final adjustments to reach championship status. The veteran market has limited premium options this offseason anyway. The free agency period wasn't particularly robust in terms of game-changing additions. This reality makes the draft even more critical. If you can't acquire elite talent through trade or free agency, and you're trying to get better, the draft becomes your primary weapon. A trade-down strategy that allows you to make multiple quality acquisitions across different positions suddenly becomes even more attractive. Think about the long-term ramifications of this approach too. Teams that consistently do this effectively, finding value throughout the draft and building depth, become sustainable competitors. They don't depend on singular draft classes hitting spectacularly. They build organizational infrastructure that persists across years. The Patriots did this for 20 years. The Seahawks did this during their championship runs. The Browns appear to be studying this blueprint and considering applying it to their specific circumstances. The talent evaluation required to execute this strategy successfully is genuinely demanding. The Browns' scouting department needs to have conviction in their evaluations at multiple positions and multiple rounds. They need confidence that when they trade back and select in the 12 to 16 range, they're still acquiring quality that can contribute immediately or develop into long-term starters. That requires an evaluation process that extends beyond traditional rankings and metrics into actual projection and development potential. Now here's where the strategy becomes genuinely fascinating from a practical partnership perspective, because the potential trade partners being discussed are particularly noteworthy and strategic. One name keeps surfacing in league circles, and it's a team that holds a special place in Browns franchise history: the Dallas Cowboys. Think about the relevance of this potential partnership for a moment. Dallas is positioned at the 7th overall pick, sitting directly behind Cleveland. The Cowboys are desperately hunting for defensive reinforcements. Their defensive line has capability, but secondary depth is concerning. Their linebacker core requires attention. Multiple reports from league insiders suggest Dallas might be willing to offer a substantial package to move up one spot and secure a premier defensive prospect before Cleveland grabs one. That's where the negotiating leverage becomes interesting. Here's the scenario being discussed in NFL circles. The Cowboys desperately want a certain defensive prospect. Maybe it's a premier edge rusher. Maybe it's an elite safety. Whatever the position, Dallas has apparently identified a player they believe fits their defensive scheme and fills a critical need. They're positioned at 7, but Cleveland is ahead of them at 6. From Dallas's perspective, there's a genuine risk that Cleveland selects their target, leaving them to settle for alternative options. This creates negotiating leverage for Cleveland in a way that most teams don't genuinely possess. If the Browns genuinely consider trading down, and if Dallas genuinely covets a specific defensive prospect, then Dallas has motivation to make a compelling offer. We're discussing the possibility of the Browns acquiring not just immediate draft picks or conditional selections, but potentially a premium future first-round pick in 2027. Why would Dallas surrender a 2027 first-rounder? Because the Cowboys have legitimate championship contention aspirations right now. They believe they're close. They think addressing a defensive hole could push them toward playoff viability or deep postseason runs. From their perspective, sacrificing future draft capital to improve their present roster makes organizational sense. They're operating under the assumption that their championship window is open now, not in 3 years. But here's where it gets truly intriguing for the Browns. The 2027 first-round pick that Dallas might surrender isn't just another future selection. League insiders are actively discussing the quarterback class arriving in 2027 as potentially the most talented in recent history. Multiple elite-level prospects are apparently being projected to enter that draft class. Colleges are currently developing multiple potentially franchise-altering quarterback talents who will be declaring in 2027. From Cleveland's perspective, acquiring a future first-rounder in 2027 is analogous to receiving a golden ticket. The flexibility that extra premium pick provides is extraordinary. Imagine this scenario. The Browns execute their trade-down strategy this year, accumulate multiple selections, and build depth across their roster. By 2027, they're genuine championship contenders. Their defensive line is performing. Their receivers are producing. Their offensive line is protecting adequately. Suddenly, that 2027 first-rounder becomes the missing piece. Maybe they use it to select a franchise quarterback upgrade. Maybe they leverage it to acquire a proven superstar receiver or defensive end when their championship window is wide open. Alternatively, if 2027 arrives and Cleveland is already in legitimate championship contention with their current quarterback situation, they can trade that pick to another team for established talent ready for a Super Bowl run. Either scenario positions the organization for sustained success rather than one-year miracles. The Cowboys' partnership specifically makes sense because of timing alignment. Dallas believes they can contend now. Cleveland believes they can contend in 2 to 3 years. Both teams have legitimate championship aspirations, but different timelines. Trading down and acquiring future assets helps Cleveland's timeline. Trading up and acquiring present defensive help accelerates Dallas's timeline. It's a win for both organizations. From a negotiating perspective, Dallas probably assumes they have several teams willing to trade up in that range. The Denver Broncos, the Chargers, the Titans, multiple organizations could be interested in moving up slightly to grab a premium defensive prospect. But Cleveland has the advantage of being ahead of Dallas and understanding Dallas's desperation. If the Cowboys truly covet a specific player, they have limited options. They either trade up with Cleveland or risk that player being selected elsewhere. This dynamic has historically created significant negotiating leverage in the NFL. Teams ahead of a desperate franchise can extract premium assets. The Texans did this when the Browns tried to move up for Deshaun Watson. The Jaguars did this when multiple teams wanted to trade up for Trevor Lawrence. Dallas would be in a similar position where their desperation creates Cleveland's leverage. Now, the specifics of what actually gets traded would depend on Dallas's exact desperation level and Cleveland's exact willingness to move. But the framework is intriguing. The Cowboys offer a combination of immediate selections plus that future first-rounder. The Browns accept, move down, accumulate multiple picks, and position themselves for a 3-year championship window starting in 2027. Meanwhile, Dallas addresses their defensive need and potentially makes a playoff push in 2024. The historical precedent for this type of deal exists. Teams do trade away future first-rounders when they believe they're close to championship viability. The Saints did it repeatedly during their Drew Brees era. The Rams did it multiple times during their recent playoff runs. From a business perspective, if an organization believes they can win a Super Bowl soon, trading future assets for present improvement makes organizational sense. What makes the Cleveland-Dallas dynamic particularly interesting is that both franchises have recent championship drought narratives. Dallas hasn't won a Super Bowl since 1996. Cleveland hasn't won one since 1964. Both fan bases are desperate for success. Both organizations might be willing to take calculated risks. If Dallas can convince themselves that addressing their defensive needs now creates championship viability, they might genuinely offer that 2027 first-rounder. And if Cleveland can project confidence that they'll contend in 2027, accepting that trade and building depth across their roster becomes strategically brilliant. Now let's shift focus to what the Browns are apparently attempting to build on the offensive side of the ball, because this is where the draft strategy becomes genuinely fascinating from a construction perspective. The organization has clearly identified that elite receiving talent and premium offensive line protection are critical components of contention, and the approach they're contemplating addresses both simultaneously through strategic accumulation. The left tackle position remains one of the most critical spots on any NFL roster. It's the blindside protector for the quarterback. It's the position where mistakes result in career-altering injuries. Elite left tackles can be held and maintained for over a decade, providing organizational continuity and protecting investment in your quarterback. The Browns desperately need a generational-level talent at this position, someone who can provide protection for years while improving pass protection efficiency significantly. Names like Monroe Freeling have generated serious discussion within evaluation circles. However, some professional evaluators express legitimate reservations about certain prospects' actual readiness to transition to elite left tackle performance at the NFL level. The difference between being an excellent college tackle and thriving as an NFL left tackle is substantial. Speed-to-power ratios matter. Hand placement develops. The learning curve is genuine. Not every college tackle prospect translates successfully. Here's where the trade-down strategy becomes brilliant. If Cleveland trades down and acquires multiple premium selections, they're not forced to select the highest-ranked tackle available at their new draft position. They can be patient. They can evaluate. They can identify the tackle they genuinely believe in from a development perspective, rather than forcing themselves to reach at a premium position. Maybe they identify a player at pick 13 who they believe becomes elite. Maybe they identify a player at pick 18 who has tremendous upside. The flexibility to evaluate across multiple positions and selections prevents forced decisions. Additionally, and this is important, the additional picks accumulated through trade downs allow the Browns to address tackle protection from multiple angles. What if they select a premier tackle prospect early, then use later selections to grab an offensive lineman development project or a position coach's favorite prospect who might need developmental time? Building depth across the entire offensive line becomes possible through volume acquisition. But the receiving room is where things become genuinely interesting from a strategic perspective. This draft class features multiple elite receiver talents at different profiles. There's size-based talent. There's speed-based talent. There's technical route running talent. Rather than being forced to select one receiver type at position 6, Cleveland could acquire multiple receiver types across different draft positions through their trade-down strategy. One fascinating scenario being discussed involves pairing complementary receiver talents. Imagine if the Browns select a primary receiving threat like Carnell Tate early in the first round. Tate profiles as a complete receiver with size, skill, and production. He can line up anywhere, threaten vertically, create after the catch, and provide consistency. He's the type of foundational talent that transforms an offense, but Carnell Tate isn't a speed specialist. He's not the extreme vertical threat that creates consistent 60-plus-yard explosive plays. So then, with a later first-round selection, potentially acquired through trade down, the Browns could target Zachariah Branch. Branch is a speed-oriented receiver who specializes in creating explosive plays. He's the complement to Tate. When defenses stack the box to defend Tate's vertical threat, Branch creates horizontal speed that produces chunk yardage. The combination of receiving talents creates defensive problems. Opposing secondaries can't employ single coverage strategies. Safeties can't cheat toward one threat, but here's another scenario worth considering. What if Cleveland pursues a slightly different strategy? What if they target Mel Lemon early instead of Tate? Lemon profiles as an elite slot specialist, someone with tremendous technical skill in route running, nuanced understanding of spacing, and the ability to find soft spots in coverage. Lemon is absolutely elite in creating separation through footwork and timing rather than pure athleticism. But Lemon isn't a boundary receiver. He doesn't have size-based mismatch potential. So then, Cleveland could use a later selection to target a bigger boundary receiver like Jacob Lane or Bryce Lance. Suddenly, the receiving room features a diverse skill set. You have your elite slot option, creating consistency in the passing game. You have a bigger boundary threat, creating red zone opportunities and contested catch situations. The combination becomes something greater than individual pieces. This is sophisticated offensive architecture. This is understanding that championship offenses don't succeed because they have one generational receiver. They succeed because they have complementary talent that creates defensive mismatches across the entire field. The top offenses in football right now, Kansas City, Buffalo, Detroit, all feature receiving groups with different profile types that create multiple defensive problems. The draft capital acquired through trade downs makes this type of complementary building possible. Cleveland isn't forced to select a single receiver and hope he transforms the entire passing game. They can build strategically. They can identify talent profiles, understand scheme fit, and construct receiving rooms designed for compatibility rather than individual stardom. Additionally, the psychological element shouldn't be overlooked. When opposing defenses study game film and see multiple elite receiving threats with different skill sets, it creates problems at every position on defense. Cornerbacks face either vertical threats like Tate or speed threats like Branch. Safeties must address both downfield concerns and slot manipulation from someone like Lemon. Linebackers become confused about responsibilities. The offense creates natural coverage headaches. The long-term construction also becomes clearer. If Cleveland acquires multiple receiver talents through this trade-down strategy, they're building a room capable of sustaining losses. If one receiver gets injured, they don't have a catastrophic rotation problem. They have complementary talent capable of stepping into higher roles. That depth is championship-level infrastructure. Here's something else that makes this offensive blueprint particularly relevant. The tight end position also requires attention. What if Cleveland, through their accumulated draft capital, also selects a premier tight end prospect? Suddenly, you have an offense featuring elite receivers and elite tight end talent. That's generational receiving talent that can sustain a contention window for multiple years. The Browns are apparently approaching this draft not as a pick one player and hope situation, but as comprehensive offensive architecture. Trade down, accumulate picks, identify complementary talent profiles, build receiving depth, and create an offense that features multiple elite contributors rather than singular stardom. That's championship-level thinking. Here's where things become genuinely unconventional, and where the Browns' strategy potentially separates from traditional draft thinking. A double trade scenario that sounds like something constructed in a video game, but could actually represent the most sophisticated move in franchise history. What if the organization doesn't simply trade down once, but orchestrates a series of multiple trades that dramatically reshape their draft approach? Imagine this progression of events. The Browns start at the 6th overall pick. They initially trade down to the 11th spot with a team like Miami, acquiring an additional early first-round pick and second-round selection in return. Immediately, Cleveland has traded one pick at 6 for multiple selections spread throughout the first and second rounds. They've moved down 5 spots in the first round, but accumulated meaningful additional assets. But it doesn't stop there. What if the organization then uses those accumulated assets to trade back up? Maybe they leverage some of their new draft capital to move from their later first-round position back into the middle of the first round, somewhere in the 13 to 16 range. This would require giving up some of the assets acquired from Miami, but the net result could be strategically superior to staying at either 11 or their original 6 position. Think about the mathematical reality of this. If Cleveland moves from 6 to 11, trading down 5 spots and acquiring additional picks, then trades some of those assets to move from their late first-round position back to the middle first round, maybe trading up 5 or 6 spots, they've fundamentally transformed their draft footprint. They've potentially moved from one premium pick at 6 to multiple selections spread across a more optimal distribution for their needs. Why would this be beneficial? Because certain draft positions have specific advantages and disadvantages. The 6th pick forces you to evaluate players against a standard of best available. Teams ahead of you have already selected. Teams behind you might trade up. There's evaluation pressure at pick 6, but at picks 11 through 15, you have different advantages. You can see who teams are valuing at specific positions. You understand which players have dropped further than expected. Then, moving back into the middle of the first round, using accumulated assets allows you to target specific needs rather than being forced to select best available. Maybe Cleveland identifies that their preferred left tackle has slipped to 13. They can trade up to ensure they get him. Maybe their preferred receiver is still available at 15. They can wait. This flexibility is powerful. The double trade scenario requires significant coordination and planning, but multiple sophisticated organizations have executed similar strategies historically. The Seahawks have done this. The Patriots have done this. The Ravens have done this. They identify draft capital flexibility as their primary objective, then use that flexibility to acquire talent at positions and rounds where they're most confident in evaluation. Here's the crucial insight that makes this theory gain traction. In this specific draft class, the talent disparity between pick 6 and pick 15 is surprisingly manageable. It's not like certain draft years, where a few elite prospects are surrounded by significant talent cliffs. This year, evaluators repeatedly mention depth. There are 10 offensive linemen who could legitimately start in the NFL. There are a dozen receivers capable of producing immediately. There's genuine depth at defensive positions. In a draft class with marginal gaps between the 6th and 15th picks, the mathematical advantage of having multiple selections actually distributed throughout that range becomes significant. You're not sacrificing elite talent by moving back. You're gaining flexibility and additional picks. The calculus dramatically changes. Consider the risk management angle too. If the Browns stay at 6 and select one player, they're concentrated. That pick either hits spectacularly, becomes a solid contributor, or completely busts. There's no distribution of risk. If they execute the double trade scenario and acquire 5 picks across different rounds, the probability that most of those picks hit becomes considerably higher. Statistically, if you hit on 60% of your picks, 5 selections yield 3 quality contributors. 1 selection might yield 1 quality contributor. Volume is your insurance policy. The execution difficulty is genuine, though. This strategy requires the Browns to identify which draft positions offer them the most optimization. They need to evaluate multiple teams willing to trade up or down at specific points. They need to coordinate timing. They need to understand precisely which selections they're willing to trade away versus which they want to maintain. It also requires conviction in their evaluation process. If you trade away premium picks and move around the draft order, you're essentially telling the world that you believe you're smarter than consensus evaluation. You're saying your scouts can identify value in spots where other teams miss it. That's a bold organizational statement, but the best franchises make those statements constantly. Here's something worth considering. The Browns organization appears to have confidence in their scouting capabilities right now. They recently upgraded their coaching staff. Their current leadership team has made relatively successful moves. Their defense exceeded expectations last season. If the organization genuinely believes in their evaluation process, executing a double trade scenario that reduces concentrated risk makes organizational sense. The financial implications are also worth considering. By accumulating multiple picks, Cleveland can distribute salary cap implications across more players. Instead of investing significant money in one premium draft pick, they're spreading investment across multiple contributors. This has long-term organizational implications for salary cap management and flexibility. The precedent is clear. Sophisticated organizations consistently execute multi-trade scenarios because the mathematical advantages are real. The Browns appear to be considering whether this specific draft class, with its talent distribution and their specific roster needs, makes this strategy optimal for their championship timeline. Now let's shift our focus to the defensive side of the equation, because understanding how the Browns' apparent trade down strategy impacts their defense is critical to understanding the complete vision. The organization has made significant moves that fundamentally alter how they should approach the remainder of their roster construction, and those implications are genuinely fascinating from a strategic perspective. The acquisition of Quincy Williams represents a game-changing move for the defensive unit. Williams profiles as a pro-caliber talent who thrives within the current defensive scheme employed by head coach Kevin Harris and defensive coordinator Joe Woods. He's the type of linebacker that affects plays across the entire defense. He's versatile. He can line up in different positions. He provides the kind of playmaking capability that transforms defensive units from adequate to dangerous. This acquisition fundamentally altered the organizational priorities at the linebacker position. For months before Williams was acquired, Jacob Rodriguez from Texas Tech was positioned as a potentially early-round target for the Browns. Rodriguez's on-field instincts are genuinely remarkable. His film study is evident. His processing speed is elite. There was legitimate organizational discussion about pairing Rodriguez with Cleveland's young talent on the defensive side. The pairing made sense theoretically. But then the Williams acquisition happened, and suddenly everything shifted. The team already possesses the elite linebacker they coveted. Drafting another elite linebacker in the early rounds transforms from a pressing necessity into a potential luxury. The organizational philosophy shifted from, "We need an elite linebacker," to "We already have elite linebacker talent, so we can address other priorities." This is actually a brilliant teaching moment about draft flexibility and how organizational acquisitions reshape draft strategy. Teams that are rigid in their draft planning often make mistakes. They target specific positions, commit to those positions, then execute their strategy regardless of whether circumstances changed. Smart organizations remain fluid. They adjust based on free agency moves, trades, and organizational evolution. If Rodriguez falls to the third round, that becomes an obvious selection for Cleveland. The price becomes justifiable because you're not passing on him at a premium position where his value is concentrated. Selecting a top linebacker in round 3 is entirely different from selecting a top linebacker in round 1. The resources invested are different. The organizational opportunity cost is different. The strategy becomes more cost-effective. But here's where it gets really interesting from a chess match perspective. The Williams acquisition actually creates significant defensive opportunity for the Browns. Because they no longer need to invest early draft capital in linebacker, they can allocate those resources toward other defensive needs. The secondary requires attention. Safety depth is a legitimate concern. Cornerback development remains an ongoing project. Edge rusher development could use additional depth. The trade-down strategy suddenly becomes even more attractive from a defensive perspective. With accumulated draft picks, the Browns can address multiple defensive priorities rather than being forced to focus on one area. They can select a cornerback early. They can select a safety in round 2. They can select an edge rusher development project in round 3. Building defensive depth across the entire unit becomes possible through volume acquisition. This is sophisticated defensive architecture. You're not expecting one draft pick to transform your secondary. You're building secondary depth through multiple selections, understanding that each piece contributes to the complete unit. That's championship-level thinking. The injury history concerns surrounding certain prospect profiles require honest evaluation. Jordan Tyson, despite being a genuinely elite receiver, carries concerning injury history. Multiple surgeries, limited availability during his college career. Questions about whether his body can withstand the physical demands of professional football. For a defensive player with similar injury concerns, the evaluation becomes slightly different, but still relevant. The organization has to honestly assess whether the potential reward justifies the injury risk. Does Tyson's elite talent outweigh legitimate durability concerns? From a mathematical perspective, if Tyson plays in 80% of games, he's still an incredibly productive receiver. If he plays in 60% of games, the calculus changes dramatically. Medical evaluation and organizational confidence in injury recovery timelines become crucial. The Browns' medical staff will ultimately determine whether they're comfortable with risk profiles on certain prospects. If they have confidence that injuries are behind specific players, that confidence might justify elevated draft positions. If they're uncertain, waiting on injured prospects and selecting them in later rounds becomes the prudent approach. Here's something worth considering about organizational culture and depth building. Championship teams rarely rely on singular star talents at multiple positions. They rely on complementary contributors, creating a complete unit. The Patriots won 17 division titles not because they had elite talent at every position, but because they had consistent talent distributed across their roster. The Seahawks' Legion of Boom wasn't just one elite safety. It was complementary talent across the entire secondary. The Browns' apparent philosophy seems to be shifting toward understanding that depth and consistency matter as much as singularly elite talents. This represents a fundamental mindset shift from previous organizations that gambled on singular draft picks, transforming entire units. The defensive advantage becomes even clearer when you consider the trade down capital in specific areas. Maybe Cleveland acquires a third-round pick where they select a cornerback with tremendous upside but limited college playing time. That player doesn't require immediate production. They're a development project, but the potential is there. Similarly, a fourth-round safety prospect might become your future starter. The depth pipeline becomes something you're consciously building through multiple acquisitions rather than hoping individual selections develop unexpectedly. This approach also addresses organizational vulnerability. If a key defensive player gets injured, you have rotation depth capable of stepping into meaningful roles. That's insurance. That's how you survive the chaos of NFL seasons. The Warriors don't win because they have one elite player. They win because they have multiple capable contributors. The same principle applies to championship football teams. Here's something that becomes genuinely frustrating when analyzing the Cleveland Browns from a serious football perspective. The national media narrative consistently underestimates this organization in ways that fundamentally misrepresent their actual organizational strength and trajectory. National analysts, sports television personalities, and prominent draft evaluators repeatedly position the Browns near the bottom of upcoming power rankings, yet they conveniently and consistently overlook critical organizational realities that paint a dramatically different picture. The most glaring oversight in national coverage is the dismissal of Cleveland's defensive performance last season. The Browns fielded a legitimate top-5 defense that consistently stifled opposing offenses. They created pressure. They made opponents one-dimensional. They forced mistakes in critical moments. Yet, national power rankings seem to completely ignore this accomplishment when projecting upcoming season performance. The logical assumption would be that a team featuring a top-5 defense would be ranked favorably. The actual treatment suggests otherwise. Why does this happen? There are several potential explanations. First, the quarterback position receives disproportionate attention in national coverage. If your quarterback isn't considered elite, ESPN and other major networks treat your team as if it's fundamentally flawed regardless of other roster strengths. The narrative becomes focused on quarterback deficiency rather than defensive excellence. It's an oversimplification that distorts organizational reality. Second, national media often operates from established narratives rather than current organizational reality. The Browns have historically been a poorly operated franchise. That history creates expectations that persist even when circumstances change. Analysts expect dysfunction because that's been their historical experience with the organization. Even when results suggest otherwise, the narrative persists. Third, the national media doesn't deeply evaluate offensive line play or coaching changes, unless those factors are genuinely catastrophic. The Browns actually improved their offensive line this offseason. They added quality depth. They upgraded their coaching staff. These moves don't generate television excitement like draft picks or free agency acquisitions. They're infrastructure improvements that serious evaluators recognize but national media largely ignores. The defensive infrastructure built under Joe Woods and now transitioning under new leadership should be recognized as significant organizational strength. Defensive coordinators who develop young players, who improve defensive efficiency, who create schemes that maximize available talent, become valuable assets. The Browns appear to have that. Yet national analysis largely ignores this advantage. Here's something historically proven. When the media dismisses Cleveland, the organization often responds with surprising performance that defies expectations. The narrative of "everyone wrote us off" becomes motivational in nature. Locker room unity strengthens. Players prove doubters wrong. This pattern has repeated multiple times throughout franchise history. The current organizational environment might be positioned perfectly for that to occur again. The quarterback situation, while imperfect, isn't actually apocalyptic in the way some national analysts suggest. The Browns have addressing that need directly. They're not ignoring the position. They understand the limitations. They're strategically building around the quarterback reality rather than pretending a perfect solution exists. The positional context matters too. In the current NFL, strong defense and adequate quarterback play can compete. It's not ideal, but it's viable. Defensive teams can win championships. The Buccaneers won with Tom Brady because they had a dominant defense. The Bengals reached Super Bowls with improved defense even when their quarterback was developing. Defense absolutely matters and transforms organizational trajectory. What national media seems to consistently miss is that the Browns are methodically building championship infrastructure from a defensive foundation. They're not trying to outscore opponents. They're not constructing flashy offensive schemes designed to create highlight plays. They're trying to construct a team that controls games, creates pressure, forces mistakes, and builds strength through depth. That's a legitimate championship construction philosophy. The coaching staff additions also matter significantly, but receive minimal national coverage. When you upgrade your coordinator talent, when you add coaches who have proven developmental track records, when you construct a staff that aligns with organizational philosophy, those changes positively impact player development and team performance. Yet national analysis largely ignores coaching improvements unless they're genuinely catastrophic failures. Here's the crucial insight that sophisticated evaluators understand. The gap between how national media ranks teams and how those teams actually perform is surprisingly consistent. Media rankings overweight recent history, quarterback pedigree, and flashy talent while underweighting infrastructure, coaching quality, and organizational depth. When those factors diverge, the organizations with superior infrastructure consistently outperform expectations. The Browns appear to understand this dynamic. They're not making moves designed to create national headlines. They're constructing a franchise designed to win football games against quality competition. The trade-down strategy, if executed, will confuse national analysts and casual observers. It will generate criticism. National media will question the approach. And that criticism might actually be advantage. When everyone doubts a team, when analysts suggest the organization is making mistakes, when power rankings position them as underdogs, the organization has no external pressure. The expectation is set low. Anything above expectations becomes a triumph. The team can operate freely without the weight of external expectations crushing them. This is reminiscent of the 2011 playoff run. Nobody expected the Browns to compete in that playoff game against Pittsburgh. Everyone predicted disaster. The team went out and played with nothing to lose and everything to gain. The same dynamic could play out again if Cleveland improves beyond national expectations. The franchise's past is rich with championship drought and organizational dysfunction. That's historical fact. But the organization's current future is being actively shaped by people making deliberate decisions designed to build long-term competitive advantage. The strategy might look unconventional to national observers, but sophistication often appears unconventional when viewed from the outside. History has repeatedly demonstrated that when the national media dismisses this team, when analysts express skepticism, when power rankings position Cleveland near the bottom, the organization often responds with performance that exceeds external expectations. The current environment, with upgraded coaching, defensive strength, a trade-down draft strategy potentially incoming, and low national expectations, might be precisely the circumstance where that pattern repeats. Now let's map out what actual championship viability looks like for the Cleveland Browns if they execute this strategy with the precision apparently being discussed. Because understanding what the end game looks like is crucial to understanding why all these individual chess moves make organizational sense. What does success actually look like? What is the Browns trying to construct? Imagine the draft concludes and Cleveland has executed their trade-down strategy exactly as contemplated. They've acquired multiple first-round selections. They've addressed the offensive line by selecting a premier left tackle prospect they genuinely believe in from a developmental perspective. They've addressed receiving by accumulating multiple receiver talents with complementary skill sets. They've built defensive depth across the entire unit. They've positioned themselves not just for 2024 success, but for sustained competitive advantage extending across multiple years. The immediate practical reality of that scenario is profound. The Brown roster suddenly features foundational offensive line protection capable of sustaining for a decade. The quarterback position, whatever its limitations, now has legitimate protection. The receiving core features multiple elite contributors, creating offensive problems for opposing defenses. The defensive unit has depth at critical positions capable of surviving injuries or poor performance at any individual position. That's the baseline construction: foundational protection, multiple offensive weapons, defensive depth. From that foundation, you can build consistency. You can compete against division rivals. You can win playoff games. You can compete in the AFC. That's the immediate organizational benefit. But the long-term implications are even more fascinating. The 2027 first-round pick potentially acquired through the Dallas trade down, or similar compensation from other trade partners, becomes something genuinely special as that draft class approaches. The quarterback class of 2027 is being actively discussed by league insiders as potentially the most talented in recent history. Multiple elite quarterbacks are currently developing in college, projected to reach the draft market in 2027. Now imagine this timeline. The Browns execute their 2024 draft strategy, build foundational talent across their roster, and establish competitive baseline by 2025. They compete in their division with their current quarterback situation. The defense remains elite. The offensive weapons develop. The offensive line matures. By 2026, they're legitimate playoff contenders with room for improvement. Then 2027 arrives, and they possess a premium first-round pick in what's being called a historic quarterback class. They have multiple options. They could select a generational quarterback talent, acquire their future at the position, and pair that talent with already developed receiver options and elite defense. That's a championship recipe. Suddenly, by 2027 or 2028, you're not just competing for championships. You're constructing a team designed to win multiple Super Bowls. Alternatively, if the current quarterback situation matures better than expected, if development exceeds projections, they could leverage that 2027 pick to acquire an established star receiver or defensive end when they're primed for a Super Bowl run. Either scenario positions the organization for success, but the flexibility is paramount. This is long-term organizational thinking. This is constructing a blueprint that projects multiple years into the future rather than gambling everything on a single draft class or single season. This is understanding that championships aren't built in a year. They're constructed across multiple off-seasons through strategic talent accumulation and organizational patience. The 9 draft selections currently available to Cleveland becomes even more valuable when viewed through this long-term lens. With 9 picks, the organization can address immediate needs while also planning for future development. They can select high-upside prospects in later rounds who might not produce immediately but develop into contributors. They can build pipeline depth that transforms into value over multiple seasons. Compare this approach to the traditional strategy, where teams desperately reach for individual prospects, hoping singular talents transform entire units. The Browns' apparent approach is quantitatively different. It's about distributing investment across multiple opportunities rather than concentrating hope into individual selections. Here's what the championship window actually looks like when this strategy executes successfully. By 2025-2026, the Browns are legitimate AFC competitors. The defense remains elite. The offense has developed complementary weapons. The offensive line is functional. They make playoff appearances. They win meaningful games. They're not Super Bowl favorites, but they're in the conversation. By 2027-2028, if the 2027 quarterback situation develops as projected, they upgrade the position with elite talent. Suddenly, you have generational offensive weapons, elite defense, improved quarterback play, and years of continuity with the same coaching staff. That's when you're constructing championship teams. That's when you make Super Bowl runs. The organizational depth built through the trade-down strategy becomes your organizational insurance policy. When key players inevitably get injured, you have rotation talent capable of stepping into meaningful roles. When underperformance occurs at specific positions, you have evaluative options. That depth is championship-level infrastructure. The fan base narrative also matters, though sophisticated organizations don't admit this openly. The Cleveland fanbase has endured championship drought since 1964. They've watched dysfunction and heartbreak for 60 years. A team that demonstrates competence, that makes intelligent moves, that constructs organizational infrastructure suggesting long-term success, begins to build credibility with that fanbase. That credibility becomes psychological advantage. When the national media dismisses you, when analysts suggest your draft strategy is flawed, when national power rankings position you near the bottom, yet your organization demonstrates consistent competence, the gap between external expectation and internal performance creates powerful motivational narrative. The team can operate from position of underestimation while building toward championship viability. The Browns organization appears to understand that championships aren't won in draft meetings or free agency negotiations. They're won during the regular season when teams execute better than opponents, when depth provides advantage, when coaching maximizes talent, when organizational culture creates resilience. The trade-down strategy, the talent accumulation, the long-term planning, all of these elements support that ultimate objective. What makes this genuinely compelling from an analytical perspective is that the strategy makes rational sense. The mathematics work. The timeline aligns with projected talent availability. The organizational capacity to execute exists. The only variable that remains uncertain is whether the organization can maintain discipline, make correct evaluation decisions across multiple rounds, and develop prospects as projected. If they do, if the Browns execute this blueprint with competence, we're potentially discussing a franchise transformation that extends across a decade of competitive advantage. That's not hyperbole. That's the realistic ceiling if this strategy executes successfully. The Cleveland Browns are on the verge of making decisions that will fundamentally reshape their organizational trajectory for the next decade. Whether they execute a straightforward draft with their 6th overall pick or orchestrate a sophisticated series of trades that dramatically redistribute their draft capital, the consequences will reverberate across multiple seasons and multiple years of competition. The strategy being contemplated, trading down, accumulating multiple selections, building depth across both sides of the ball while securing future assets, represents a philosophical shift in how the organization approaches roster construction. It's a strategy that requires conviction in evaluation capability, confidence in coaching infrastructure, and willingness to make unconventional decisions that might confuse casual observers but ultimately yield championship infrastructure. The national media will continue dismissing Cleveland until results demand otherwise. The skepticism will persist. The power rankings will remain unfavorable. But the Browns organization appears to have accepted that reality and turned it into advantage. They're building a franchise designed to win football games, not designed to generate headlines or satisfy national analysts. The path to the Super Bowl doesn't begin with draft day. It begins with organizational decisions made in war rooms and meeting spaces where nobody is watching. The Cleveland Browns are apparently making those decisions with precision and long-term vision. Whether that vision becomes reality remains to be determined. But the blueprint being constructed suggests championship ambition extending far beyond 2024. Stay connected, as the next update could fundamentally alter the trajectory of orange and brown.